Ladies and gentlemen, why? Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do in love is nothing at all. When he pulls away, your silence speaks louder than every word you ever said. It's in that quiet space, when you stop chasing, stop proving, stop begging, that he finally feels what it's like to lose your energy. Because the truth is, the moment you let go of trying to control him, you step into a power that no one can ignore. When you stop chasing a man who's pulled away, something shifts, not just in him, but in you. Most people think silence is about punishment or manipulation, but real silence, the kind that carries weight, comes from emotional strength. It's the silence of someone who knows their worth. When a man distances himself and you resist the urge to chase, question, or convince him to stay, your silence becomes a mirror. It reflects his behavior back to him and makes him face what he's trying to avoid. In the early stages of pulling away, many men assume your attention will always be there. They believe they can step back, take space, and you'll still be waiting, emotionally available, ready to re-engage when they decide to return. But when you don't do that, when you quietly step back without anger or pleading, it disrupts his expectation. Your silence unsettles him because it communicates something deeper than words ever could, that you're not dependent on his presence to feel whole. Most women are taught to fix things, to nurture, to reach out when there's distance. So when you don't, when you choose calmness instead of panic, he begins to feel an unfamiliar shift. He wonders if you've moved on, if you've lost interest, or if maybe he misjudged your feelings. That uncertainty gets under his skin. He's used to being in control of the dynamic. Your quiet detachment flips that balance completely. But the real beauty of silence isn't in how it affects him. It's in how it frees you. It's a space where you stop over-explaining, stop trying to prove your value, and start remembering who you are outside of this connection. You begin to see how much of your energy was spent analyzing every text, every pause, every mixed signal. The moment you withdraw that energy, you begin to heal. Silence becomes your boundary. It protects your peace, your dignity, and your emotional clarity. This doesn't mean you're playing games. You're not withholding communication to manipulate him. You're simply choosing not to chase someone who's showing disinterest. There's a huge difference between emotional control and emotional detachment. Emotional control says, I feel everything, but I don't let it control my behavior. That's real confidence. You're not ignoring him to make him suffer. You're giving yourself the respect you always deserved. When you don't respond, he starts to feel the absence of your energy. Before, he might have taken your messages for granted. Now there's quiet, and that quiet speaks volumes. It reminds him that attention isn't a right, it's a privilege. When a man realizes that your attention is something he has to earn, his mindset changes. He's no longer the one dictating the pace, he's the one wondering where he stands. Silence doesn't mean coldness. It's not about pretending you don't care. It's about caring enough for yourself not to chase what's walking away. It's self-respect in action, and that's what makes it powerful. When you don't react, you're showing him you're emotionally grounded. You're saying, I can love you, but I won't lose myself for you. That's a rare kind of strength, and it's the one thing that truly captures attention. A man might not consciously understand why your silence affects him so deeply, but he feels it. He feels the contrast between your past warmth and your current composure. He feels the sudden quiet in a space where your energy used to live. And the truth is, human nature makes us value what we lose access to. When you were always there, he didn't need to question your feelings. But when you step back, he starts to wonder what you're thinking, who you're talking to, if you've moved on. That curiosity starts turning into reflection, and reflection often turns into regret. But the most transformative part isn't what's happening in him. It's what's happening in you. You start realizing that silence isn't emptiness. It's strength. It's the sound of you reclaiming your emotional balance. In that space, you reconnect with the things that make you feel alive, your purpose, your goals, your friends, your passions. You stop orbiting around his attention and return to your own center. That's where your true power lives. And when you do that, something incredible happens. Your silence no longer comes from pain, but from peace. At first, it might feel like resistance, like you're forcing yourself not to reach out. But as days go by, you start noticing the calm that comes from not being emotionally dependent on his responses. You realize you can have love without anxiety, connection without chasing, and desire without desperation. That shift is life-changing. He may come back when he feels your absence, but by then, you're not the same woman he left. You've learned that your voice doesn't always need to be heard for your value to be known. You've learned that not reacting can be the most powerful reaction, and that's what most men aren't prepared for. The moment they realize that silence isn't weakness, it's emotional maturity. When you stop trying to fill every silence with explanation or reassurance, you start to see the truth more clearly. You notice who reaches back, who stays distant, and who only values you when you're no longer available. Silence becomes a filter. It separates the ones who are truly invested from the ones who were only comfortable when they had your attention on their terms. This is why your silence matters. It's not about teaching him a lesson. It's about teaching yourself that you don't need to chase love to keep it. You don't need to convince someone to value you. When you hold that kind of quiet confidence, you attract people who recognize it, because confidence doesn't scream, it doesn't beg. It simply exists, and that's what makes it magnetic. The irony is, when you stop chasing, the right people start coming closer. Your silence shifts the energy. It says, I trust that if you care, you'll show it. And if you don't, I'll be okay. That's what self-assured love looks like. It's not passive, it's powerful. It's choosing peace over panic, dignity over desperation. And that's what most people misunderstand. Silence isn't the absence of love. It's the presence of strength. It's knowing that your attention, your care, and your emotional energy are valuable currencies. And when you stop spending them on someone who's not investing back, you create space for someone who will. When a man pulls away and you choose silence instead of pursuit, you're not losing him. You're finding yourself. You're rediscovering the woman who existed before the overthinking, before the waiting, before the constant wondering. You're reconnecting with the version of you who doesn't need validation to feel secure. And that's the version of you that's truly irresistible. Your silence is not a void. It's a statement. It's the calm assurance that you know your worth, even if someone else doesn't. It's the quiet confidence that says, I don't chase what's running. I attract what's meant for me. And even though it may not be loud, it echoes far louder than any words you could say. Ignoring someone who's pulled away is often misunderstood. People assume it's about control or revenge, but in truth, it's about something much deeper, self-respect. It's about recognizing that love isn't proven through pursuit. It's preserved through boundaries. When a man pulls away and you choose to hold your ground instead of chasing after him, you're not being cold or manipulative. You're communicating your value in the most powerful way possible. Through your actions. You're saying, without words, I care for you, but not at the expense of my dignity. In relationships, it's natural to want to fix things when they feel off. When someone you care about becomes distant, your first instinct might be to reach out, to ask what's wrong, to remind him of the connection you share. But the danger in doing that is that it puts all the emotional responsibility in your hands. You begin to carry the weight of both people's effort. And love cannot thrive that way. Love only grows when energy is mutual, when both people are meeting each other halfway. Ignoring him after he pulls away isn't about playing games. It's about creating space for that balance to reappear. Men often test the strength of a connection without even realizing it. They pull away to regain a sense of freedom, to check if their emotions are too exposed, or to see if you'll chase them and make them feel validated again. But if you do, it confirms a subtle but dangerous dynamic that he can withdraw affection and still keep your attention. That tells him, consciously or not, that your self-worth is tied to his behavior. And once a man senses that, the relationship's power dynamic begins to tilt in a direction that rarely recovers. But when you don't chase, when you don't break your silence, something different happens. He starts to realize that you're not clinging to his approval. You're not trying to pull him back to you. You're simply letting him go if that's where he wants to be. That kind of confidence is magnetic. It's not the loud, aggressive kind of power. It's quiet, calm, and deeply unsettling to someone who expected your dependence. Ignoring him in this context doesn't mean cutting him off in anger. It means choosing not to reward emotional inconsistency. It's saying, I won't fight for someone who's walking away from me. That's not pride. It's clarity. It's refusing to negotiate your worth in the currency of attention. Because every time you chase, you reinforce the message that his absence controls your peace. But every time you stay still, you teach both him and yourself that your peace is not negotiable. Self-respect isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's quiet restraint. It's that deep breath you take when your mind screams to text him, but your heart reminds you that your energy deserves reciprocity. It's that pause between impulse and action where you choose dignity over desperation. That's not weakness, it's wisdom. It's knowing that real connection can't be forced or maintained through pressure. And here's the paradox. The very moment you stop trying to make him care is often the moment he starts to. When you pull back, you create emotional space. That space forces him to feel the absence of what he took for granted. When you were always available, your attention became predictable. But now, your distance introduces uncertainty, and uncertainty creates desire. It makes him reflect, not because you manipulated him into it, but because you allowed him to experience what life feels like without your presence in it. Ignoring someone respectfully, without bitterness, without passive aggression, is one of the highest forms of self-respect. It's not closing your heart, it's simply saying, I won't invest where I'm not valued. It's love with boundaries. It's affection without self-abandonment. And that's what distinguishes confidence from games. Games are about control. Confidence is about self-preservation. The truth is, most people don't realize how much power they give away through over-communication. Every time you chase after someone who's retreating, you reinforce the idea that your peace depends on their validation. And the more you do that, the less they value it. It's human nature. We tend to undervalue what's easily accessible. When you're constantly available, constantly trying to fix things, you inadvertently teach the other person that your love doesn't require effort. But when you stop, when you step back and let silence do the talking, the dynamic changes. He begins to see the contrast. Before, your presence was a given. Now, it's missing. Before, your energy was his comfort zone. Now, it's a void. And in that void, he starts to feel the weight of his own actions. That's where real introspection begins. Not when you explain, not when you plead, but when you disappear into your own peace. Self-respect means trusting that love won't disappear just because you stop chasing it. It means believing that if a connection is genuine, it will withstand your boundaries. You're not ignoring him to hurt him. You're allowing the relationship to reveal its truth. If he truly values you, your silence won't push him away. It will pull him closer. But if he doesn't, then your silence will simply expose that. Either way, you win because you stayed true to yourself. Ignoring him also rebalances your emotional energy. When someone pulls away, your instinct is to fill the gap, to restore the connection. But the more you try to fix it, the more anxious and powerless you feel. By stepping back, you shift your focus inward. You start nurturing your own emotional well-being instead of feeding the void his distance created. You spend time doing things that make you feel grounded, your hobbies, your friends, your passions. And as you do, you begin to realize that the world didn't fall apart when he left. You begin to feel whole again. That's the transformation silence brings. You stop reacting out of fear of losing him and start acting out of love for yourself. You stop needing him to validate your emotions and start validating them yourself. That's where true strength lies. Not in indifference, but in emotional discipline. You care, but you don't collapse. You love, but you don't chase. You feel, but you don't beg. When you ignore him, it's not a declaration of war, it's a declaration of peace. You're saying, I'm not fighting for attention anymore. I'm protecting my energy. And that kind of quiet conviction has a gravitational pull. It commands respect, even from those who don't understand it right away. Because eventually, they realize that ignoring him wasn't about shutting him out, it was about honoring yourself. And in that process, something changes inside you. You start realizing that love shouldn't feel like a constant test of your patience or worth. It should feel like two people meeting each other halfway, not one person doing all the emotional work. So when you stop chasing, you're not giving up, you're giving the relationship a chance to either rise to your standard or fade away. Both outcomes are clarity. You begin to notice how peaceful it feels not to over-explain, not to send one more text, not to fill the silence. You start to see that ignoring him isn't about withholding. It's about letting go. You're no longer begging someone to see your worth. You're living in it, and that shift in energy doesn't just change how he sees you, it changes how you see you. Ignoring him is not about revenge, it's about respect. It's about remembering that you can love someone deeply and still choose yourself. It's about realizing that the most powerful thing you can ever do in love is to walk away from anything that requires you to forget your value. When you stop over-investing in someone who has pulled away, something powerful begins to happen. Clarity. Emotional distance isn't always a punishment. Sometimes it's a revelation. When there's space between you and him, everything that used to be clouded by emotion suddenly becomes visible. You start to see the truth about his intentions, your own patterns, and the reality of the connection you've been holding on to. Distance has a way of stripping away illusions, and that's exactly why it's so uncomfortable at first. We're wired to want closeness, to seek reassurance, to close emotional gaps. But what most people don't realize is that distance is often the very thing that brings understanding, and understanding is what brings peace. When you give a man space, you're not just stepping back from him, you're stepping into yourself. You're allowing both of you the opportunity to reflect. For him, that distance becomes a mirror. It forces him to confront what he feels when you're not there to constantly reassure or engage him. For you, that same space becomes a sanctuary, a quiet room where you can hear your own voice again. It's in that stillness that you start realizing whether you are holding on to love or holding on to hope. Men often don't process emotions in the same way women do. When things get intense or confusing, they instinctively retreat. It's not always about rejection, it's about regulation. They pull away to regain a sense of balance, to quiet their thoughts, to understand what they truly feel without pressure. The problem arises when, in response, you try to close that gap too quickly. You text more, you question, you reach out, and in doing so, you unintentionally make the space disappear before he's ready. That's why he stays withdrawn. But when you resist that urge and let the silence linger, something shifts inside him. He begins to notice your absence. He starts to think, not because you told him to, but because he finally has the room to. Distance is uncomfortable because it highlights uncertainty, but it's also the birthplace of perspective. When you step back, you start seeing the patterns that were invisible when you were emotionally entangled. You notice who initiates contact when things calm down, who shows consistency when it's inconvenient, and who only shows up when you're giving energy. That awareness gives you power, the power to make decisions based on truth, not attachment. He, on the other hand, begins to experience the reality of what life feels like without you. When you were always there, always reaching out, he never had to miss you. You were his emotional safety net. But distance takes that away, and in doing so, it exposes what's real. If he truly cares, he'll feel the void and move toward you again. If he doesn't, he'll stay comfortable in the space. And that tells you everything you need to know. Either way, you gain clarity. It's easy to mistake silence for indifference, but often it's the only environment where emotions can breathe. Constant communication can become noise, distracting, reactive, emotional noise that hides the truth underneath. When you stop over-explaining and start observing, you learn far more than when you were trying to make him understand you. You begin to see if he's capable of understanding on his own. Distance also reveals dependency. You start to notice how much of your emotional state was tied to his attention. When he pulled away, did you lose peace? Did your day revolve around whether or not he texted? These are hard questions, but they're necessary. Because once you identify those patterns, you can begin to break them. You can reclaim the parts of yourself you gave away in the process of loving him. You realize that love should enhance your life, not consume it. For many people, the fear of losing someone is so strong that they never allow space to test the strength of the connection. They keep chasing, fearing that if they stop, the person will disappear. But that's exactly what prevents clarity. Because if someone only stays because you never give them space to leave, they were never truly choosing you. Distance forces choice. It shows who's willing to meet you halfway and who is only comfortable being chased. In the beginning, that space feels like rejection. It feels cold, like the connection is dying. But often, what's actually dying is the illusion, the fantasy version of the relationship that lived in your mind. When you stop filling every gap with effort, you start seeing what's really there. You start realizing that if someone doesn't meet you where you are, it's not because you're unworthy, it's because they're not ready. That understanding can hurt, but it's also liberating. It releases you from waiting for someone to change. And here's what many don't expect when you create distance. You also create attraction. People are drawn to mystery, to energy that's not constantly available. When you stop over-investing, he begins to feel a natural curiosity return. He starts wondering what you're thinking, what you're doing, if you've moved on. The same woman he once took for granted suddenly becomes unpredictable again. And that unpredictability reignites interest. It's not manipulation, it's human psychology. We value what we can't completely possess. But what matters more than his reaction is your evolution. In that distance, you learn emotional independence. You learn how to comfort yourself instead of waiting for him to do it. You begin to see your own strength, not because you're detached, but because you're centered. You discover that peace isn't something he gives you. It's something you create. That's the most empowering lesson distance can teach. Clarity doesn't always come from conversations. Sometimes it comes from silence, from watching actions instead of listening to promises. You start noticing the small details, how he handles conflict, how he responds when you don't make things easy, how consistent he is when your energy isn't feeding the connection. These are the truths that only time and space can reveal. And once you see them, you can no longer unsee them. That's how growth happens, not in emotional intensity, but in stillness. Distance also rebalances power. In every connection, there's a rhythm of give and take. When one person keeps giving while the other withdraws, imbalance forms. The giver becomes anxious, the other becomes complacent. But when you pull back, the rhythm resets. He's forced to engage or let go. Either way, it brings balance, and balance is what every healthy relationship needs. Sometimes the clarity distance gives isn't about him at all, it's about you. It helps you see how much of your identity became tied to being chosen. It shows you where you've been neglecting your own joy, your own dreams, your own boundaries. It gives you a chance to rebuild your emotional foundation so that when love comes again, whether with him or someone new, it meets a version of you who doesn't lose herself in it. Distance doesn't destroy real connections, it refines them. What's genuine survives space. What's shallow fades. That's why the ones who truly care will eventually close the gap themselves. They'll reach back, not out of guilt, but out of recognition. They'll realize that the silence you gave wasn't rejection. It was respect. You respected their space, and now they respect your strength. That's how authentic attraction works. It's built on choice, not pressure. The clarity you gain through distance becomes your compass. It helps you make decisions that aren't fueled by fear or longing, but by wisdom. You stop asking, will he come back? And start asking, do I still want him if he does? That's the shift from attachment to awareness. It's where your emotional maturity blooms. When you allow space, you stop forcing outcomes. You stop chasing answers from someone else and start finding them within yourself. You learn that love isn't about constant closeness. It's about trust. Trust that if it's real, it won't disappear the moment you stop holding on to it. And that realization changes everything. The moment you stop trying to control how someone feels about you, a quiet kind of power begins to rise within you. It's the power that comes from knowing that your worth doesn't depend on anyone else's recognition of it. When you let go of the need to make a man stay, to make him see your value, to make him love you the way you love him, you start stepping into a version of yourself that's unshakable. You begin to understand that letting go isn't a loss. It's an act of strength. It's the moment when you stop handing over your emotional power and start standing in it. When you've been emotionally invested in someone who's distant or unsure, the hardest thing to accept is that you can't make them choose you. You can show up with kindness, effort, and authenticity, but at the end of the day, you can't force connection. Love isn't something you win. It's something that flows naturally between two people who are ready for it. And the more you try to control it, the more it slips through your fingers. That's why letting go is so freeing. It allows space for the truth to reveal itself without your constant effort shaping it. At first, letting go feels like surrender. It feels like giving up on something you deeply wanted. But over time, you begin to see that you're not giving up. You're simply choosing peace over chaos. You're choosing clarity over confusion. You're choosing to stop negotiating for someone's attention as if it's something you have to earn. Because the right person won't make you fight for the bare minimum. There's a quiet dignity that comes from releasing what isn't meant for you. It doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you care enough about yourself not to cling to uncertainty. It's standing in the truth that love that requires you to beg or prove yourself isn't love, it's attachment. And attachment feeds on fear, the fear of being alone, the fear of being forgotten, the fear of being unworthy. But once you face those fears and walk through them, you discover something extraordinary. You were always whole. The love you thought you needed from someone else was a reflection of the love you hadn't been giving yourself. Letting go doesn't mean closing your heart. It means opening it in a new direction. It's the moment you shift your focus from, how do I make him love me, to, how do I love myself better? That question changes everything, because when you start pouring your energy into becoming your best self, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, you stop chasing validation. You become the validation. You radiate an energy that says, I'm enough. And that energy attracts people who see your worth immediately. When a man feels that kind of grounded confidence, it shakes him. It's different from the usual chase he's used to. It's not cold or distant, it's self-assured. It's the quiet certainty of someone who doesn't need to convince anyone to stay. That's the kind of presence that leaves a lasting impression. Because in a world where most people are desperate for attention, the one who's content without it stands out. You start to realize that the power of letting go isn't just about relationships. It's about life. It's about releasing the illusion of control. You can't control what people do, how they feel, or when they come back. But you can control your energy, your boundaries, your response. And when you shift your focus there, everything changes. You stop reacting and start responding. You stop grasping and start allowing. You stop asking why and start saying, thank you for the lesson, for the growth, for the clarity that came through the pain. There's a certain strength that comes from walking away quietly. No drama, no bitterness, no explanations, just calm acceptance. That silence carries more weight than any angry words ever could. Because it's not about punishing anyone. It's about honoring yourself. It's about saying, I choose me, not out of pride, but out of self-love. When you let go, you also begin to see how much energy you are giving away. Energy spent worrying, overthinking, waiting for texts, decoding mixed signals. All that energy was yours. When you reclaim it, you start to feel lighter. You start sleeping better. You start laughing again without forcing it. That's when you realize how much emotional space that situation had occupied. And in that space, new possibilities begin to grow. Men are often drawn to women who are grounded in their independence, not because they're unattainable, but because they're at peace. There's a magnetism in peace. It feels safe, confident, whole. When you let go of control, you naturally embody that energy. You stop trying to be chosen and start choosing. You stop reacting to rejection and start responding to alignment. You stop fearing endings because you trust that what's meant for you will never pass you by. Letting go is not an act of indifference. It's a deep act of trust. Trust in yourself, in timing, in life. It's trusting that whatever happens, you'll be okay. It's knowing that losing someone who doesn't want to stay is not a reflection of your worth. It's a redirection towards something better aligned with your spirit. And that trust radiates confidence. When you stop grasping for control, you exude calm certainty. You move with grace. You become the person who doesn't chase because she knows she attracts. Every time you choose not to react, not to beg, not to prove, you reinforce your emotional strength. You're telling the universe, I'm ready for something real. You're clearing away what's temporary to make room for what's lasting. It doesn't happen overnight, but one day you wake up and realize you're not haunted by the same thoughts anymore. The person you were holding on to no longer defines your happiness. You're free, and freedom is the most magnetic quality a person can have. Letting go also changes your relationship with love itself. You stop seeing love as something you have to chase and start seeing it as something you share when it's right. You stop confusing intensity with intimacy. You stop mistaking inconsistency for mystery. You start to crave peace instead of excitement, connection instead of control. That's the moment when you evolve, not just as a partner, but as a person. When you let go, you learn to listen to your intuition again. You stop silencing that inner voice that told you long ago when something felt off. You start trusting your instincts instead of overriding them for the sake of keeping someone close. That's how you rebuild self-trust. And self-trust is the foundation of self-worth. Because when you trust yourself, you no longer settle for anything that disturbs your peace. Sometimes the most powerful love story isn't the one where you win someone back. It's the one where you win yourself back. When you let go, you take all the energy you were using to hold on to someone else and reinvest it into your own growth. You start showing up differently in every part of your life. You speak with more certainty. You make decisions without second-guessing yourself. You carry yourself with quiet assurance, and that changes how people see you and how you see yourself. You begin to realize that the love you were chasing outside of you was always meant to start within you. The validation, the peace, the safety, they were never supposed to come from him. They were supposed to come from the relationship you build with yourself. When that relationship becomes solid, every other connection you have will either rise to meet your energy or fall away naturally. Letting go doesn't mean closing the door forever. It means no longer waiting by it. It means walking forward with your head high, knowing that what's real will always find its way back, and what's not will fade without needing your resistance. It's a quiet confidence that says, I'm not afraid of losing anyone who's not meant for me. Because the moment you stop fearing loss, you gain everything. Your peace, your confidence, your power. When you release control, you step into flow. You stop fighting against what's leaving and start trusting what's coming. You stop seeing endings as failures and start seeing them as redirections. And in that mindset, love stops being something you chase and becomes something you naturally attract. Because nothing is more attractive than a person who knows their worth, trusts the process, and walks away gracefully when something no longer aligns. In the end, letting go isn't about walking away with anger. It's about walking away with peace. It's about understanding that real love doesn't require you to lose yourself just to keep someone else. When you stop chasing, when you stop over-explaining, when you choose silence instead of struggle, you send the clearest message of all, now I know my worth. The man who's meant for you won't be scared by your strength. He'll be drawn to it. Because the moment you stand in your value, you stop attracting confusion and start attracting commitment. Your power was never in making him stay. It was always in knowing you'll be okay, even if he doesn't.